Good morning and welcome back, Tail Waggers, to episode number 112. That PPE is not what the dog needs to do. It's personal protective equipment for the professional pet sitter. Can you believe we are at month 6 of the Tail Wag briefings? I am Beth Pasick, the voice of Field Notes for Pet Pros, and this week we are talking about PPE, personal protective equipment for yourself, your team, and for life as a professional pet sitter. If you find this conversation helpful and are sharing it with your team, remember it can be used as part of your due diligence training in your safety system program. Copies are available over at Field Notes, the number 4, petpros.com. Use code PPE to get 50% off your documentation at checkout through June 28th. And remember, it includes this opening module as well as all 4 weeks of the tailgate briefings. If you're ready, let's get into it because I think this one might surprise you just a little bit. It is part of the pet sitter safety training system. We are talking about personal protective equipment. Pardon me. And the relevance of this is 29 CFR 1910 132 and H, the employer responsibility for both providing and for paying for personal protective equipment. The entire month we will be talking about why personal protective equipment is your legal obligation. It's not a perk or a suggestion. What the employer is required to provide at no cost to the worker or a team member, and what each piece of PPE required addresses and why it's on the list. And what the workers, your team members, are responsible for once they get that PPE, personal protective equipment, in their hands, and what optional personal protective equipment exists and when it fills a real safety gap to what to do with it. Under OSHA's Personal Protective Equipment Standard 29 CFR 1910 132, employers are required to provide personal protective equipment when the hazards cannot be eliminated through engineering or administrative controls. In our jobs, in pet sitting or dog walking, most of these hazards cannot be engineered away because the environment changes at every single visit and the animal's behavior is inherently variable. That means personal protective equipment is not a supplement to safety. In many situations, it is our last line of protection between a team member and a foreseeable injury. The required personal protective equipment must be provided to your employees at no cost. And that is unambiguous. That is highlighted in the Code of Federal Regulations that the employer pay for that equipment if it's required to perform the job safely. Workers, team members should never purchase their own protection against hazards created on the job. What might you need to provide? Let's talk about that. Are you in a winter area? Do you need to provide winter traction devices like ice cleats or slip-on grips for falls on those icy sidewalks and walkways and the exterior surfaces? One of the most consistent hazards we see in winter pet sitting is that icy driveway, that icy sidewalk at 6 a.m. It's definitely foreseeable, and injuries in that situation can be catastrophic. So traction devices are pretty much a non-negotiable in winter conditions and should be available before they are needed, not ordered after the first fall. A flashlight or a wearable headlight. Again, the hazard we're addressing with something like that are falls and hazard misidentifications in low light conditions, like early morning or evening visits happen in darkness year round. So if a team member who cannot see the step, the latch, or the animal's own body language clearly is a team member operating with a significant safety deficit. So a reliable light source is a baseline piece of equipment. Disposable gloves. Some pet owners will provide these for you, and some may be a surprise morning when the dog or the cat has decided to have an accident. So what the disposable gloves are for are to deal with the biologics, the biological exposure. Things like animal waste, potentially blood, bodily fluids, some types of medications. They may be used during litter box maintenance, waste cleanup, and any task involving contact with any type of biological material. Now, here's where sometimes things get tripped up. These are single-use gloves. So the team member must have them available in a sufficient quantity for the visit. Not optional for any task involving animal waste or bodily fluids. Approved cleaning or sanitation gloves. Oh, well, wait a minute. What does that mean? Well, what hazard are we looking for? The chemical exposures during sanitation tasks. These are different from the disposable gloves that we just talked about. Thicker, reusable gloves used when handling cleaning agents. Cleaning products in client homes may be more concentrated or a different formulation than expected. And a good set of cleaning gloves reduces the dermal exposure. One set of gloves doesn't cover that because the permeability of the gloves or how the gloves absorb chemicals or the chemical degradation of the glove can be affected. And of course, the high visibility vest. And here we're talking about making sure that your team member avoids a vehicle strike during nighttime dog walking. They're required when walking dogs in low light or nighttime conditions near vehicle traffic. A pet sitter, dog walker in dark coated dog at 5:30 a.m. along a street is essentially invisible to drivers without reflective material. This is an underappreciated hazard with serious consequences. A piece of PPE is not worth a piece of PPE that is not with your worker is no protection. The employer obligation includes ensuring that the PPE is available, functional, and accessible, not just purchased and stored somewhere. Workers must have what they need before they need it. Your team member's responsibility is, of course, there are obligations for them, and that is to use the PPE consistently and correctly, not on visits when they feel like it, but at every visit where that hazard is present. Inspect that personal protective equipment before each use. A glove with a hole in it is not protection. A traction device with a broken attachment is more of a fall risk itself. So report damaged and missing equipment immediately to the team lead so it can be properly replaced. And we do expect them, since they are our mobile team, that they're going to store their personal protective equipment properly between uses. Reusable personal protective equipment stored in the bottom of a bag under wet gear degrades faster and performs worse. So let's keep it clean, dry, and accessible, and know where it is before you need it. And here's something that needs to be said very plainly. We do not want them to substitute unapproved alternatives using a different product than the one provided or approved, because it creates a risk for you, the employer, who has not assessed it yet. If you think an alternative would work better, raise it with your supervisor and do not substitute unilaterally. And yes, failure to use the required personal protective equipment increases risk and may result in a disciplinary action. This is not a punitive policy. It reflects a straightforward reality. Your PPE exists because a hazard has been identified and a control method has been selected. Bypassing that control is bypassing your safety system. Now, when it comes to optional PPE, these are things that are going to be probably business specific. Workers may choose to purchase and use additional protection based on their specific clients' routes, physical conditions, or seasonal needs. Optional items are not required by the employer but are recognized as legitimate safety enhancements. Things you might be looking at doing that are optional would be soft protective gloves for fractious cats. This is to avoid those puncture and scratch wounds during handling of reactive or fractious cats. Standard disposable gloves offer almost no puncture resistance from a cat bite or scratch, and soft protective cat handling gloves provide a meaningful layer of protection during medication administration or handling of known reactive cats. Workers with clients who have fractious cats should consider using these as a practical necessity rather than an optional extra. Sunscreen and cooling gear. UV exposure and heat illness during extended outdoor walks. Workers spending extended time outdoors in the summer are at real risk of both sunburn and heat-related illnesses. So lightweight, breathable clothing, cooling towels, and sunscreen protect the worker, as well as enabling better judgment about when to modify and shorten an animal's walk. Knee pads. That is a new one. For knee strain and contact injury during extended litter area cleaning or floor level pet care. Workers who need significant time crouching or kneeling for a litter box maintenance, feeding floor level animals, or cleaning up accidents can reduce cumulative joint strain with knee padding, particularly relevant for workers with higher visit volumes or pre-existing concerns. The infamous safety whistle. Again, this is a personal security in isolated or unfamiliar neighborhoods. Lone workers in unfamiliar neighborhoods, poorly lit areas, or situations where personal safety is a concern should carry a whistle, a safety whistle, as a minimal additional security tool. It works alongside of, but not instead of, your lone worker check-in procedures and awareness. Insect repellent. Oh, this is a big one here in our area because we have a bumper crop of ticks this year. Insect repellents, the hazard this addresses are ticks and mosquito exposure during outdoor dog walking. Workers in tick-heavy or mosquito-dense environments face vector-borne illness. Risk during extended outdoor visits. Applied to worker clothing and not near animals or the animal food sources, this insect repellent reduces that exposure risk without creating a chemical hazard to the animal. Required PPE must be supplied by your employer. Optional PPE may be purchased by the worker. If a worker identifies an optional item that they believe should be required, given the hazards of their specific route or clients, they should raise it with their team leader or their supervisor. The distinction between required and optional is not fixed. It is a function of your business's hazard profile. Here's your knowledge check. After completing this little training, your team should be able to understand what OSHA 29 CFR 1910 132H, who is responsible for providing and paying for your required PPE. They should be able to name the 5 required PPE items in this training packet for each one and identify the specific hazard it addresses. Number 3, a worker arrives for a visit and realizes their traction devices are left at home, and the walk is going to be an icy one. What should happen at this point? Number 4, what are the 5 worker responsibilities for personal protective equipment once it has been provided? And number 5, what is the difference between required and optional personal protective equipment for your business? And can that distinction change? And number 6, why is a high visibility vest on the required personal protective equipment list for pet sitters? For the trainer and supervisor, here are your notes. Suggested discussion questions for the week. Do a quick check right now. Does everyone have all the required personal protective equipment with them? If not, what's the process to be sure they have it? Has anyone ever been in a situation where they needed personal protective equipment and did not have it? And what happened next? And is there optional PPE that you found genuinely useful that we haven't talked about? What would make it easier to consistently use PPE on every relevant visit? And is it a habit issue, an access issue, or something else? A completion of this particular module should be documented in your workers' training record. Thank you for listening to this morning's Tail Wag briefing, and have a safe and productive week.